rate increases consistent with this plan, some future board could come back and vote to defer the rate increase at some point in the future. So it may just be an issue in semantics. Do we require a future board to defer a rate increase, or do we, require or urge a future board to adopt a rate increase? And it, like I said, it may be just an issue of semantics, although an important one philosophically. I know y'all feel like the lunatics running the asylum, which that's the nature of the beast right now. What would it do to us if, I know that right now the plan is for you all to present a resolution to us in August for action. We don't have the July meeting. What if we adopted a couple of different resolutions and looked at them again in August and then took action in September? Are we getting too far down the road? Because I think you said the electric rate increase and the water rate increase would take effect in January of the calendar years.
The electric would be in October. But we have flexibility with that. It doesn't have to.
What if we did that? What if we adopted, what if we came up with drafts of resolutions that reflected the two different approaches? And
well, we have, as a board, I think, collectively tried to speak to going boards, and I think on this issue we should too.
Yeah.
And ever how we get to that, I'm for it. So if everybody thinks 3 years is about it, then I would go right along with that. So how do we get, just take, have votes and whatever, I don't know if that's the way to do it, just everybody can talk to me, and we can figure it out. I don't know.
Let me just, go ahead. May I?
Sure.
Just draw a poll here. Do you guys want to see a resolution, if you will, that's more committed to time? Instead of 2 or 3 years, it's maybe 4 or 5 years. You already said you don't want to do 10 years. I understand that. We make a commitment, like you say, Bruce, to century 2. I don't like the way you said it, but and we somehow have a craft resolution that says we're committed to these rate increases for 4 or 5 years from now. And
Well, that just throws the feelings out of the window, though. Why would we do that necessarily? And I understand what Keisha's thoughts are, and I do understand. But, why would we just automatically say we're not going to do it for 10 years?
I would just like to, over the next couple of weeks, maybe do some research, do that, and kind of see what effect that would actually have on what you all think.
Yeah, because it seems, I'm not so concerned about future boards, because I think they've had enough. If we went ahead and committed to this, I think that they would, look at be educated and go along with this. But I guess what I'm trying to understand, your concern seems to be the TVA is going to change their structure, and that's going to affect how we do things. So the structure, okay, does the structure going to affect the charges? We're increasing charges, not rates, right?
They hypothetically, they could create a whole new class of customers that don't exist today. They could be anybody using more than 10 megawatts or something like that. So you would actually have to pass a rate increase that applied, or a rate that applied to that class of customers. So I think that's what we're saying. It's not that we wouldn't get the revenue, it's that there may be a different class of customers created.
And the question is, and this is something we might need to do some research on with Bill Coley, is could the board adopt a rate increase per se without having to go ahead and adopt a schedule for 10 years? In other words, the specific rate that would be charged January or October 2014, 2015, 2016. That's my vision of it when we talk about 10 years of rate increases is that, and the concern of going ahead right now and making those decisions about how that's going to be applied to specific rates 10 years out.
Let me offer is for your consideration and approach. The beauty is we have 2 months before the next board meeting, so that gives us a good bit of time to consider your input again and to go back and come up with some approaches, and that we will personally one-on-one share that evolution with you in the next 2 months. Then we would come back to this board with an approach or more than one approach that would be options that you could consider as it relates to the actual increase of rates. But what I'm hearing in consensus is that you would be willing to go beyond 3 years, maybe to 5, maybe 10, but we could come back to you with the pros and cons of those different approaches. And if you felt comfortable with adopting one of those approaches at the August meeting, fine. If you want to consider it, then it'll be pushed to September. So we're not bound by time here, but that would get us at least something before you that you could discuss, and we'll do more in-depth research. We really haven't looked at the pros and cons of beyond 3 years because we weren't anticipating that, but now give us some time to go back and do that, and we'll come back to you with our feedback on those approaches.
But I think the consensus is that everybody in the board is okay with these two long-term funding plans. You don't need to tweak the plan itself. It's more,
Right.
how do we implement it in terms of governance
Yes.
from the board's point of view.
And when I say the 5 years and not 10, that's today, with no knowledge that all of a sudden it's going from 2 to 3 to 10. My comfort level is just not there today. I mean, after you all do research and we all kind of come in with more information, 10, I may be comfortable, yes, but today.
Can I just ask this question? You guys made the decision to postpone this plan based on economic conditions. Have you seen enough change? Obviously, I guess you've seen enough change in conditions to go ahead with the plan again. Not as aggressively
Yeah.
as
That was the point I was going to make.
and that part B is, is there potential that whatever factors they were 2 or 3 years ago, that you suggest to postpone, you see those factors again being prevalent, widespread?
Unfortunately, I can't predict the future, except to say that not resuming Century 2, I can predict what that outcome is going to be. And despite what the economic conditions are, they may be a little better, they may be a little worse, it doesn't eliminate the issue of the infrastructure is just getting older and older and older. So, yeah, we have the flexibility to postpone it 3 years, but I don't know how many years more one can do that, even in spite of the economic conditions.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we got a plan.
Okay, that'll play.
A plan to take another good plan.
We have about 15 minutes, if you all are, is that okay with you? Will we proceed with a 15-minute presentation?
Sure.
Okay, well, here's the deal. As you know, many years ago, we identified aging infrastructure as an issue, and we knew it was going to take more revenue in order to be able to support the needs of the system. But we were uncomfortable coming to the board with asking for that revenue without first looking internally to areas where we could save money, take those savings and apply it to the infrastructure. We have 3 presentations that we're going to share with you over the coming board meetings about areas in which we have had that kind of focus, and we want to share with you the results of those savings. And the first one we want to start with today is Susan Edwards is going to share with you what we've done in the past with labor costs and managing those costs, as well as what those savings will project into the financial plan going forward. Susan.
This chart should be familiar to you all as well. Some of the ones that you saw in Mark's presentation, this was in 5-year plan, and we use it just about every year to illustrate the fact that one of the biggest levers we have in our operating and maintenance costs is labor. We're not unusual in that service-based industry. 54% of our costs in the O&M budget are due to labor. So it's a very important thing for us to manage if we're going to be able to manage our costs and invest what we need to in our infrastructure over time. There are other business drivers that have helped us in this regard over the years, and even going back as far as the 1990s, which is some of you all on the board will remember. At that time, we had a number of things facing us. Deregulation had come to the natural gas industry. It was predicted to come in the electric industry, and that was causing us to look at our business model and to see what we needed to do to be competitive in that changing business environment. So that was one of the challenges we had. We also had customer expectations that were rising for how responsive we were, our communications efforts, many different things that our customers were looking for us to do better. And that was some of the things that went into our decisions at that time about how we managed our labor force. Today, no surprise, as we've been talking about, aging infrastructure is the primary challenge. It's causing us to have to invest more in our systems at a time when changing consumption habits and the economic conditions generally are putting financial pressures on our financial plan. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that are driving us to do things to manage our labor costs. Our goal is to do that with a balance, so that we're doing everything we can on the cost side to be good stewards of our resources, but also keeping in mind that we have to be able to be competitive as we look to attract and retain the talent to carry out this work for our customers. So it's a balance, and you'll hear me talk about that more today. These are some of the things that we've done over the years, and we went back to the 1990s to talk about some of those things because as anything you're doing with labor and either payroll or benefits changes has a long time horizon on it. Things that you change today can add up to many more savings over the years. So if you look back into the 1990s, one of the first things we did in this area was look at our head count. We were going to be a leaner organization, more attention paid to our costs. One of the things that we recognized then, as we do now, is that managing our head count was one way to do that. We also knew there would be a lot of changes to our business practices and our culture, and that might be difficult for some folks who maybe were nearing retirement anyway and just didn't want to deal with that. So we offered an early retirement incentive to eligible employees, and right at that time, we're able to get about a 10% reduction in our headcount as a result. So those folks left. That was a good decision for them. It helped us to immediately start driving the changes that we needed in our workforce as well. We also redesigned our pension, and at that time that required a referendum. We had a pension plan that was defined benefit, very much like many in the marketplace then, focused on people who started working here very young and stayed all the way to retirement. And for us to bring in the people we needed with business skills and experience in the private sector, we didn't think that was going to be suitable for that. So we redesigned our pension to be a combination plan, defined benefit and a defined contribution, to allow us to attract those folks and retain them. We also modeled many of our benefits to what was going on in the private sector. We ended post-retirement medical coverage for our new employees. That's a benefit that we provided for many years. Many other companies have as well. In the 90s, we ended that for new employees. So while we still have that benefit available to people who were retired then or have retired since, people who are hired today don't have that benefit from KUB. Today, our focus continues to be on reduced staffing, managing our overtime, and our benefits costs, and we'll talk a little bit more about all of those. You saw this chart as well, a 5-year plan, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I will call your attention to the line, and you'll see, again, this is a trend that has been building over time from the early 90s, and throughout this 5-year plan, you can see we will have gone down over 266 positions already since 1993. We'll be at 875 by the end of this coming fiscal year and predict to stay that through the 5-year plan. And we've done that in a way we hope is strategic. None of these reductions were achieved through a layoff or through a formal hiring freeze. What we have done instead is to really focus on the functions that we're doing, and when someone leaves KUB, we look at that position on an individual basis and say, is that something we can stop doing, which is something we did with our appliance repair service. And those are other opportunities out in the marketplace for customers to get that. We didn't have to do that, so we stopped doing it. Is it something we can achieve by moving someone internal? In recent years, our new service work has fallen off, so that's allowed us to reallocate some of those resources, those people, to other jobs that needed doing at KUB. So we move people around internally to help fill those needs. And we still hire from the outside. A good example of that is in our overhead construction areas. As you know, for a line worker, that is a job that takes many years to master, to learn the skills to do. And so as we have people retiring in that area, we are continuing to hire line worker apprentice classes. In fact, we've hired 2 classes in the last 3 years, so that we can be sure that we're maintaining that pipeline of skills and are ready to serve the needs of our customers. So hopefully the things that we're doing are continuing to manage this trend in a way that does not negatively impact our service to customers. Here's another chart. It's very kind of busy, but it's a good example of how some of the other things we've been doing at KUB to provide better service are also paying benefits and labor costs. If you look at this chart over time, this is what we pay in overtime by pay period going back to about 2005. And all of these peaks that you see throughout are generally related to storm responses. So when we have a big storm, we have more overtime. That's not a big surprise, and that's April. That's the hail week, so you can see that's a huge outlier. The good news in this chart is that in the period since about 2009, the average that we've been spending on overtime per pay period has dropped about 38%. And that's in part due to the fact that we are monitoring and managing it more closely, but I believe that really the big driver is that you're not seeing these large peaks as often and as high as you did before. And that's a credit to the work that's been done to manage reliability on our system, whether it's vegetation management improvements or just better response tools that we have, whether it's technology or assigning folks, the way we use our work resources when we have storms. We think that's a big contributor to how that curve has changed. If you compare us to our peers, that's another thing we do. You saw in Mark's presentation, that's something we look at a lot. Our percentage of overtime as a percent of standard work hours in 2010 compared favorably to our peers in the big five TBA distributors. But you have to be careful because you can also make that metric by being overstaffed, and we wouldn't want to do that, so we look at that as well. In this slide, a higher number is better because that means you're serving more customers per employee, and you can see that we're serving about 181 customers for every employee. That compares favorably to our peers as well. So we think that the things that we're doing in staffing and managing overtime are appropriate and are doing what we need to do. Let me shift gears now away from payroll and talk a little bit about some of the benefits plan changes that we've made over the past few years. Just like any company, we look at our benefits portfolio every year, and particularly with regard to our health benefits, we do make tweaks on a regular basis to our co-pays and our premiums to make sure our cost share with our employees continues to be steady. But these are some of the bigger initiatives that we've worked on in the past several years. Starting back in 2007, this board established a trust to help fund those post-retirement medical benefits we talked about earlier. And by doing that, the advanced funding is helping us to save an estimated $61 million over the 30-year horizon that we used when we planned that. In 2009, we changed how we coordinate our benefits for retiree medical with Medicare. That's saving us what was estimated at the time about $1.4 million per year. In 2010, we made some significant changes to our prescription drug benefit, both for employees and retirees, and that saved us about $500,000 last year. 2011, I want to call particular note to, is another change in our pension plan. And you'll recall back in the 90s, we said we changed away from a sole defined benefit plan to a combination plan. This year, we've actually done away with our defined benefit plan and shifted all of our retirement resources for new employees to a defined contribution plan. And that's projected to save us about $7 million over the next 20 years. So that is something that we are looking for additional savings going forward. And lastly, starting next year, for, again, our retirees who are eligible for post-retirement benefits, they'll be switching their prescription drug coverage from our plan to Medicare Part D plans, which are available out in the marketplace. That will, as you see, save us a good bit of money over the next 20 years as well. So these are all over different time periods and started in different time periods. We tried to assemble all that in one chart to show you really what the long-term impact of this is. You can see, starting back in 2007, that's when we started funding the OPEB trust, and so there's some costs there. But going forward, over the next 20 years, we're projecting that the changes that we've just talked about are going to save about $226 million. So it's just an example of how when you start making these small changes over time, they do start to impact what we can do in terms of investing in our systems. Every dollar we're not spending on labor is something that we can put into our systems. And so these savings have been incorporated into our financial plans. They've allowed us to keep our rate increases low over time. They have allowed us to keep the rate increases going forward lower than they would otherwise have been. So that's why all of this is important. Just one additional piece of detail is to show you kind of how those savings break out. Payroll being the largest, and again, that's a function of headcount. As we continue to reduce our staffing down, that has the biggest impact on our labor costs over time. Active medical and pension are in there, as well as how we deal with our retiree medical benefits. So it takes a lot of different levers to work to make these savings happen. I talked about balance earlier. I want to be sure we don't forget the fact that we want to make sure that our employees are here and doing the job that we need to for our customers, and that our customers are not harmed by the steps that we're taking. One of the ways we look at that is through our customer survey. And if you go back to 2000 and on through 2010, you can see that our customers view our employee professionalism very positively. This is on a 1 to 4 scale. Even back in 2000, we were above 3. We've trended up to around 3.3 for both our residential and business customers, and that's at a time that our workforce has fallen about 10%. So we think this is a good measure. Anecdotally, the work that, what we heard from customers during the storm was people are valuing what our employees are doing. We think this is something important to keep an eye on. So, in closing, it was about 15 minutes. We are trying to continue to manage our labor costs really because it does help us with everything else you talked about this morning, being able to invest in our system. But we are also keeping an eye on the fact that we have to have benefits and salaries that are competitive enough to bring in the folks that we need to make these changes happen. All of our benefits decisions really balance those two things, and we'll continue to watch all those things as we go forward. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
With the, I'm sure we're like everybody else, we have an aging workforce. The benefits side of that medical and everything else is, I assume we anticipate that increasing dramatically.
Benefits costs, I mean, they are growing, not dramatically, but not dramatically. Some of the changes that we've made to our plan have helped. The prescription drug coverage is one notable thing that we touched on today that has really had an impact, and our employees have been very good about utilizing those services the way we hope they will, and it seems to be paying off. So employees have been really good at hanging in with us through all these changes.
Other questions, comments? Any other business? Anybody out there have any business? Okay, we're adjourned, and we will have a staff and board lunch session across the hall.